Hi there, everyone. I'm meteorologist Steve Pelletieri, and I am the Weatherman. Thank you for tuning in to my latest weather episode of my podcast. And today we're going to talk about the upcoming hurricane season. Predictions by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and other sources. We'll talk about a little bit about typhoons and those seasons, along with weather news across the globe. First, I want to say that the first storm of the Atlantic hurricane season is coming a little early. Actually, early storms have been happening in each of the last 5 hurricane seasons along the Atlantic, and I guess this year is no exception. On Thursday, May 14th, 2020, a storm was brewing off the coast of Florida, and information from the National Hurricane Center in Miami forecasted on Saturday, May 16th, that the tropical disturbance was just off the coast of Palm Beach in Miami, and was forecasted to move almost due north. And they were expecting on Saturday that it would become a tropical storm or tropical disturbance, tropical depression over the next 48 hours, and that would carry us right in through Monday. And the hurricane season runs from June 1st through November 30th in the Atlantic, and you can monitor the activity and forecasts from the National Hurricane Center by going to www.nhc.noaa.gov or nhc.noaa.gov. You really don't need the www, but nhc.noaa.gov. And that will give you all the information on the upcoming hurricane season. If the first tropical storm of the season does form off the Florida coast or off the Carolina coast, it'll be a cold tropical storm and be named Arthur. The names for this year are going to be Arthur. The second would be Bertha, Cristobal, Dolly, Edward, Faye, and Gonzalo, and Hannah, Isaias, Josephine, and Kyle, at least up to the K's. The National Hurricane Center will put out their forecast for the upcoming season on Thursday, May 21st at 11 a.m. And the speakers will address the anticipated activity for the 2020 hurricane season and provide information on how to prepare for the season, which officially extends from June 1st to November 30th, as I mentioned. But at the time, we may have the first named tropical system in the books, and that could be Arthur, in that third week of May 2020. One of the ways that our weather center at Ion Weather anticipates and tracks these storms is by using the numerical models. And these come out of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction at College Park, Maryland, University of Maryland. Then long-term models is called the GFS. GFS stands for the Global Forecast System. And it's the global numerical weather prediction system containing a global computer model and variational analysis that is run by the United States National Weather Service. And as mentioned, that's at College Park, Maryland, the University of Maryland. This model is run 4 times a day, 8 p.m., 2 a.m., 8 a.m., and 2 p.m. of each day. The output's usually available at 10 a.m. or at least 2 hours after the model is run. And we're going to talk in detail about the global forecast models, not only in the U.S., but in other parts of the country and in the world in future podcasts. But right now, let's take a look at the GFS for this time and what it's forecasting on that tropical system along the eastern seaboard, third week of May 2020. The storm was located on Saturday afternoon, generally centered off the Grand Bahama and to the east of southeast Florida, right from about Miami to Fort Lauderdale. And the system was going to track north-northeast, parallel to the Georgia and South Carolina coast, and possibly make land as a tropical storm just north of Wilmington, North Carolina at 8 a.m. on Monday, May 18th. From that point, the storm would go over to the Outer Banks of North Carolina and over Virginia Beach and pretty much stay parallel to the Delmarva and New Jersey coast by 8 a.m. Tuesday. And that means that possibly making a pretty good rainmaker for the New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania and New York City area. Strong southeast winds associated with this storm may cause some coastal beach erosion, coastal flooding, and an extensive high tide as the storm moves by Wednesday into Thursday of that week. But the storm should be absorbed over the eastern seaboard or tracked towards the northeast. But one thing's for sure, there'll be a storm along the eastern seaboard on the week before Memorial Day, from Monday the 18th to Wednesday or Thursday the 20th, 21st, one day before the National Hurricane Center makes that prediction for the whole season. That prediction is coming up on Thursday the 21st. Now, here's a little background about the National Hurricane Center, but the National Hurricane Center is a component of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction located at Florida University, International University in Miami, Florida. The National Hurricane Center mission is to save lives, mitigate property loss, and improve economic efficiency by issuing the best watches and warnings and forecast analysis of hazardous tropical weather conditions and increasing the understanding of these hazards. And I really believe they do a great job. I mean, they're really trying very hard. It's a very strong and a very important mission. The NHC, the National Hurricane Center, vision is to be America's clear and trusted voice in the eye of the storm, and with its partners enabling communities to be safe from tropical weather threats. The National Hurricane Awareness Week is a full week of May, the first full week of May, and that informed and gave information to all the folks along the eastern seaboard and also in the west to provide all NOAA partners and Weather Ready Nation ambassadors, news organizations, to inform the general public to prepare safely and to get information that's issued concerning hurricanes and tropical systems. Now, the National Hurricane Center has many branches to achieve these goals. The Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch is located in Miami Center and generates analysis and forecasts of tropical systems and subtropical systems in the eastern and north-south Pacific, and, of course, the Atlantic basins, what we're concerned with along the eastern seaboard, everything that comes from the Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, and up this way. But it's just not limited to that. We're also looking at the weather situations across the Pacific and along the eastern seaboard of the United States and any other type of what we call other types of storms that may be forming in those places. The eastern, north, and south Pacific and the Atlantic basins are year-round forecasts along with what's going on in the Atlantic from the organization in Miami. And they're included but not limited to the forecast of high seas, weather forecast for offshore waters, marine weather discussions, and of course, the tropical weather conditions that occur from June 1st to November 30th, and of course here in mid to late May as well. I was talking about earlier the satellite mountain. Well, we've gotten so much more information using satellites, using the new enhanced computer prediction methods in order to forecast hurricanes and tropical situations. And this is something that has been enhancing and continuing to improve all the weather forecasting tools, analysis, and the warnings and watches that come out of the National Hurricane System, the National Hurricane Center down in Miami. Now, they do contain several units down in Miami. They're down in South Florida. The first one is the Storm Surge Unit, and it's part of the Technology and Science branch, and it's charged with forecasting the abnormal rise in sea level accompanying tropical cyclones using the sea height data. Now, they also talk about what's called blowout conditions. That's when a storm goes by and the winds shift around strongly from the opposite direction, and low tides tend to be that much lower, stronger low tides causing a tremendous or very large beach situations, which could be a little bit misleading because eventually it comes right back to average. But blowout are also something that they deal with as well. So storage center unit, the most important, of course, being when storm surges come in, the tides get that much greater and it causes flooding along coastal areas. Nobody really cares about when the tide goes out and goes out too far, unless, of course, a tsunami is coming. When you have a tsunami coming, one of the first indications is that all of a sudden the beach goes away and it goes far off, sometimes as much as a quarter to a third of a mile away from where it's normally, towards the ocean. That means that what's happening is the water is being drawn out as a tsunami comes towards you. We'll talk about that in another podcast. But in the meantime, the storage center unit, very, very important. Of course, the Chief Aerial Reconnaissance Coordination, or Hurricane Hunting Unit, are the Hurricane Hunters, and that's the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. It's a component of the 403rd Air Weather Wing, and it's located in Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's a one-of-a-kind organization. And I'm going to do a special podcast on this because I love aviation, and it's the only operational unit in the world flying weather reconnaissance on a routine basis. These famous hurricane hunters have continuous missions to coordinate all tropical cyclone operation reconnaissance requirements, and in support not only to the National Hurricane Center, but also to the National Winter Storms Operation Unit. Most folks don't know that. The hurricane hunters also go out there looking at blizzards as well. Now, this, along with tropical weather forecasts and other scientific operational missions, are flown in advance of the high-impact weather events like hurricanes, tropical cyclones, and, of course, other weather systems like blizzards and nor'easters forecasted to affect the United States, such as the heavy snowfall, supercells, and, of course, the tropical systems. Finally, the Hurricane Liaison Team supports hurricane response operations through a rapid exchange of information between the National Hurricane Center down in Miami and the National Weather Service and emergency management community. This organization is composed of emergency managers and National Weather Service meteorologists. And you have to be able to say meteorologist when you're a meteorologist. It's meteorologist and hydrologist. Now, a hydrologist deals with the reporting and analysis of how much water in the form of rainfall, river-wise, lake outflow, downflow, all that. That's what hydrologists work with. They also work with FEMA. And, of course, finally, this team establishes and facilitates video and teleconferences done with Homeland Command. The National Hurricane Center also works with FEMA and other federal agencies like State Emergency Operations Centers, the Weather Prediction Center, the Storm Prediction Center out in the Midwest, and the River Forecast Centers. And they're all under NOAA and the U.S. Department of Commerce. There are lots of centers that NOAA supports in keeping us safe from the weather environment. A thing I do, and I really do believe, I think they do an excellent job. In summary, the National Hurricane Center in Miami handles Atlantic hurricanes to affect the continental United States that are going to be affecting the continental United States, and also for Pacific hurricanes that exist from Panama, Central America, to the Mexican West Coast, including Baja, then the California coast, all the way up north to Canada. And that's the area that's handled by the National Hurricane Center in Miami. Also part of the National Hurricane Center is the National Hurricane Center and Central Pacific Hurricane Center. That's located in Honolulu, Hawaii. There, they handle severe storms, winter storms, and all heavy cyclones, from southern Alaska all the way down to the equator. The area of responsibility, on average, is about several thousand miles in all directions, centered in Hawaii. There are other centers for tropical predictions in the world. They're located in Tokyo for the Eastern Pacific, the island of Nadi for the South Pacific, Wellington, New Zealand for the Deep South Central Pacific, Australia, Jakarta, Moresby, New Delhi for the Indian and Arabian Sea, and the island of La Réunion, just to the east of Madagascar, off the African coast. They forecast tropical disturbances and typhoons, which brings us to our next discussion. What's the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon? Actually, the only difference between a hurricane and a typhoon is the location where the storm occurs. In the North Atlantic and Central North Pacific and Eastern North Pacific, the term hurricane is used. The same type of disturbance in the Northwest Pacific is called a typhoon. Actually, once a tropical cyclone reaches a maximum sustained winds of 74 miles per hour or higher, it's classified as a hurricane or a typhoon or tropical cyclone. That depends on where the storm originates in the world. In the Atlantic hurricane season, as I mentioned, between June 1st and the 30th of November, more than 95% of tropical cyclone activity occurs. Now, during this period of time, in this region, of course, this week we have a tropical system, so it's just a little bit early, as it has been and mentioned over the last few seasons. Typhoons in the Northwest Pacific are most common from May to October. Well, they could form all year round in the South Pacific. It's a cyclone season. It's between November and April, so you can see the problem with tropical systems can occur all year round in some places of the world, depending upon if you're in the northern hemisphere or in the southern hemisphere. So how do these storms form? Well, just about any tropical cyclone forms or begins to form when you have warm seawater that causes the air above it to rise quickly. Now, as the air cools down it's pushed aside by more warm air that's rising below it. The cyclone causes strong winds and pressure differences over the sea. A tropical storm can whip up huge waves, and when these waves reach land, they can flood large areas, including towns and cities, as we've seen in many places in the U.S. and, of course, around the world, especially in the Pacific. Now, over land, these strong winds can cause a lot of damage by flattening homes. They knock over trees and tip over cars, depending upon the strength of those storms. They cause power outages for long periods of time, which result quite a bit of difficulty for civilized society using all the light and the warmth and efficiency that electricity brings. Scientists do say that currently the temperature of the ocean waters are going up, and that this could lead to hurricanes increasing in intensity. In the future, they also believe that a hotter atmosphere could also hold more water, and that may result in tropical cyclones or hurricanes dumping more water on affected areas. But I believe sea climates have been changing over the past thousands of years, and we're only having data for possibly the last 170 years, and real scientific data probably over the last 40 or 50 years. Now, consider the advancement of computer science and computer power. That's significant. And also, keep in mind, solar activity was at a minimum in the late 18th century, like 1895, 1899 was at a minimum right then, but starting to rise. Solar activity began to increase in the early 20th century, and it reached a maximum during the mid to late 20th century, somewhere between 1960 and 1990. Now, as we approach the first quarter of the 21st century, it's already the 20, we're 1/5 of the way through. 5 years, we'll be a quarter of the way through. Solar activity as an extreme minimum. It's at an extreme minimum right now. So we may be at the beginning of a changing climate that may, over the next 25 years, result in cooler conditions, despite all the global warming pundits' predictions. Hey, it's the sun. And lately, it's been throwing less heat at us from the solar flares. Less heat from our number one source of heat means cooler conditions. This is all unknown and unfortunately has bogged down in the political rhetoric, not allowing real science and real analysis to come to conclusions. But hey, that's just my opinion looking at the weather over the last 45 years. Political opinions may be trumping scientific information. Now look at it this way. If you want to be able to do a paper, you want to get funding from a politically expedient type of attitude, you have to say and do what they say, predict or actually investigate what they believe, and you get the dough. If it's not popular, you're not going to get any money, you're just going to have to teach. But again, that's just an opinion. Now back to hurricane formation, though. We get a little off track there for a while. Back to hurricane formation, let's talk about the Atlantic hurricanes and how they typically form. Now again, hurricanes are the most violent storms on Earth, and they form near the equator or over warm ocean waters. Actually, the term hurricane is used for, as I mentioned, the large storms that form over the Atlantic Ocean and the eastern Pacific Ocean. The generic scientific term of these storms, as I mentioned earlier, whenever they do occur, is a tropical cyclone. A tropical cyclone. That is basically, it takes the place of a typhoon, takes the place of a hurricane all across the world. A hurricane is a tropical cyclone. Typhoon is a tropical cyclone. Although in the late May 2020 tropical system was forming off the Florida coast and moving up along the eastern seaboard Atlantic, hurricanes often have their origins off the West African coast. So we have this one thing forming just off the Florida coast. That happens in the early season. Most of the time it forms off the African coast and moves westward. Now these storms off the West African coast actually don't affect West Africa or even the islands close by like the Verde Islands or Canary Islands. They don't usually get hit by hurricanes. Since the easterly winds carry the storms away from land, and most Atlantic storms that move off the African coast tend to be weak at first, and then they move along or just to the north of the equator. They move westward, unfortunately, towards the North American continent. And as these storms get closer to the warmer waters, close to the equator, they intensify. Now, the measurement of intensification is listed by categories. And the categories go from 1 through 5. Hurricane categories 1 through 5. These categories are listed off what's called the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale. Category 1 is the weakest of the hurricanes and has a sustained wind between 74 and 95 miles per hour. Now, of course, gusts may be higher but are not figured into classification. So you can have 74 mile an hour sustained winds. A hurricane could have gusts to 100. Basically, it's a Category 1 at 74 miles per hour because that's the sustained wind. A Category 2 storm is from 96 to 110 miles per hour. A Category 3 storm is called a major storm. It's the first of 3 types of categories, major storms, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, Cat 3 and 4 are both majors along with 5. The Category 3 hurricane goes from 111 miles per hour to 129 miles per hour in sustained winds. Then the storms are really bad. Starting with the Category 4 major hurricanes is from 130 to 156 miles per hour sustained winds. In other words, just being out there, you have a 150 mile an hour wind coming right at you. The big bad one, of course, well, that's the Category 5 major hurricane. Category 5 is listed from 157 miles per hour or higher. I guess it could take you all the way into the 200s. It's a term or higher that really causes catastrophic damage, and that is what is expected with a Category 5 hurricane. Catastrophic damage means a high percentage of framed homes will be destroyed with total roof failure and wall collapse. You'll also have fallen trees and power poles. Will isolate residents in areas where they're trapped. Power outages could last for weeks, possibly up to months, again, with Category 5 catastrophic situations. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks or months, as you can see why the feared Category 4 and 5 hurricanes are very disastrous events. Okay, so let's summarize our categories of hurricanes. Category 1, that's the weakest, but there are very dangerous winds associated with the storm, and they will produce some damage. Now, we'll construct home frames. Well-constructed home frames could have some damage on Category 1s to the roof and to the shingles. Large branches of trees will snap, and shallow-rooted trees may be toppled. That's Category 1. There could be extensive damage to power lines, too, but the Category 2 hurricane with 96 to 110 miles per hour is extremely dangerous and will cause extensive damage with near total power loss. Cat 2 can cause near total power loss in an area. The expected power outages could last from several days to weeks in a Category 2 storm. Now, a Category 3 storm is the first of the majors, is where devastating damage will occur. Even well-built framed homes may incur major damage or a removal of the roof. Imagine a roof flying off a house like that. That's from a Category 3. It starts with that one. Decking and many trees will be snapped or uprooted. Downed trees and limbs could block important roads, keeping emergency personnel from being able to get to where they're needed. Of course, electricity and water will be unavailable for several days to weeks after this type of Category 3 storm occurs. And, of course, the middle of the major hurricanes is the first really catastrophic storm. This is the Category 4. This is the first of the catastrophics. 3 is major. 4 starts the catastrophic form of storm. And catastrophic winds will cause sustained severe damage with loss of most of the roof or structures of some exterior walls and well-built homes. And you have a well-built home, Category 4 comes by, just kind of blows it apart. The roof comes off. Once the roof comes off, sides go away. And, of course, its integrity is broken tremendously, and you can actually have the whole thing just sort of like flattened completely. The catastrophic winds will cause sustained severe damage and will affect areas uninhabited, keep areas uninhabited for weeks to months because of the lack of food, water, electricity, or even being able to get to those places because of all the debris strewn about. Of course, I told you about the big bad Category 5, 157 miles per hour or higher. Again, it's even worse catastrophic damage that will occur with this type of storm, and the effects on life lasting for weeks or months. So this is the mission of the National Hurricane Center, to protect you from these storms, from the lightest Category 1 or tropical storms all the way up to a Cat 5. And nobody wants that Category 5 for sure. Categorizing each storm using science, observations, discussions, getting the information out to emergency managers, federal, state, local, municipal, and even emergency personnel, all in an effort to keep you safe, or as safe as possible. Now, hurricanes aren't pretty. They might look pretty on a satellite map, might be exciting to track, but to be one of the fools who do attend or keep a hurricane party is doing so at tremendous risk of loss and life of property. Not just during the day of the storm, but for weeks and months on end, depending upon the category and the strength of the storm. So there you have it. Getting close to hurricane season right now, you have a better idea on how they form and how dangerous they are. They occur all around the world with various names just about every time of year, depending upon location. It used to be May was the month and nothing really happened, but now we're having these tropical systems in late May. So that's out the window. Our hurricane season goes from June 1st to November 30th, but how do we prepare? Well, most importantly, of course, you determine your risk. You listen to the news. You listen to emergency information coming from your local, state, and federal agencies. You have to develop an evacuation plan. If you're along the coast, there are a lot of hurricane evacuation routes that you can take. And if you're told to leave, once again, if you're told to leave your location to go to safer places, either on land or away from the storm, then damn it, leave. Leave for as long as needed. Assemble disaster supplies. Always make sure you have power, food, clothing, provisions, and of course medical safety equipment like Band-Aids, gauze, or anything else in case somebody gets injured until you get to a hospital or a medical facility. Make sure your insurance for your home is up to snuff. Check with your agents. Also strengthen your home in case the storm, even a Category 1, is coming your way, or a tropical depression or tropical storm. Help your neighbor if needed. And also, I want you to check if your elderly or disabled neighbors need some help. That's very important. And finally, complete a written plan of what you're going to do if, in fact, a hurricane of any category is going to affect your area and home and loved ones. For those weather enthusiasts, and I know there's a lot of you out there, you can use this internet for all of your resources as long as you have power, for as long as your cell phones and handhelds have power, and as long as your battery power is sufficient and you're able to charge it. The number one place to watch and get advisory on hurricanes and tropical storms and depressions is the National Hurricane Center. That's at NHC. That's NOAA.gov. NHC.NOAA.gov. There you can track storms in the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific and Central Pacific, as well as advisories for the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico. Also listen for the Eastern North Pacific and the Central North Pacific for our West Coast friends. Now, let's be hurricane strong and make that plan today. This deals with personal safety, knowing your evacuation zones, family preparedness, building a disaster supply kit, financial security, and have an insurance checkup. Strengthen your home for damage prevention and help your neighbors and community service. Being hurricane strong will save lives and keep us as safe as possible. Finally, and summing it all up, the Atlantic hurricane season starts this June 1st. The most active period is usually from August through September and even into early October. Predictions for this upcoming 2020 season from the National Hurricane Center are due out soon. Some private weather centers are forecasting above normal hurricane observances with the possibility of 4 to 5 major storms. And again, as I mentioned, major storms are Category 3 through 5. This is associated with the fact that ocean temperatures have been warmer, and when that air rises above that much warmer water, the hurricanes form and intensify greatly. Interestingly enough, you can look back to the last year's prediction. Last year's prediction, the 2019 hurricane season from NOAA, predicted a likely range of 9 to 15 named storms. Non-named storms, once again, are anything over 39 miles per hour, like a tropical storm. And those 9 to 15 storms they predicted for last year, 4 to 8 were forecast to become hurricanes, including 2 to 4 major hurricanes. That was, again, the prediction from NOAA last May, 2019. Now, what actually happened? Well, what actually happened is we had 20 named storms, 2 of which were subtropical storms. Now, I know a lot of folks wonder what a subtropical storm is. Well, it's basically a weather system that has some characteristics of tropical systems. These guidelines have been in effect since the 1950s. Now, meteorologists were uncertain whether they should be categorized as what they call tropical or extratropical. Well, finally, they were officially recognized by the National Hurricane Center as subtropical in 1972. But simply, a subtropical cyclone has both tropical and non-tropical characteristics. On the other hand, to continue the confusion, a post-tropical cyclone was once a tropical situation, but now has fronts and a cold core. That takes it out of the tropical category, and of course, the tropical cyclone is purely a tropical symmetrical, and it has a warm core. But we got something else for you, too. Extratropical storms. Now, these storms are known by many names. They form outside of the tropics, usually at the mid-latitudes, between 30 and 60 degrees north latitude. From the equator, that would put us right around from Virginia Beach on the East Coast up to Portland, Maine, in the Boston area. Out on the west, it would be from about San Francisco right up through about Seattle and the west coast of Canada. When these are named, the names for these terms typically reflect local conditions, often indicating the origin of the storms. Now, prevailing winds are usually a factor when they name these extratropical storms. You've heard of nor'easters. Well, there's also a thing called a southwester. I don't deal with that mostly because I'm in the Northeast. Extratropical storms are driven by temperature differences where two air masses meet and create a front. An extratropical storm has to have frontal systems involved, usually a warm front from the center to the east and a cool front from the center to the southwest. A lot of hurricanes and tropical systems become extratropical when they get up to the colder north waters. So again, last year we had 20 named storms, and of those 20, at some point, 6 more major hurricanes occurred. However, one of those major hurricanes was just major for about 3 hours. None of the major hurricanes, except for one, directly hit the eastern seaboard of the United States. Last year, 4 major hurricanes were in the Atlantic or off the east coast of the U.S. One skirted the eastern seaboard and was tropical, actually a tropical storm, and then a hurricane or a major hurricane, Dorian, from August 24th through September 7th. 4 tropical systems directly hit the Gulf of Mexico, U.S. states, and northeast Mexico, and they included Hurricane Barry, which reached western Louisiana July 11th through 15th, Tropical Storm Fernando, that touched South Texas and northeast Mexico, September 3rd and 4th, and Tropical Storm Imelda went from Houston as a tropical storm September 17th through 19th. And finally, Tropical Storm Nestor, which affected the Tallahassee area of western Florida Panhandle from October 18th through 19th. But again, it was a tropical storm, so no major hurricane hits last year. Most of the hurricanes were off in the Atlantic. Let's see what the National Hurricane Center has to predict this year with a report due out soon. Do I have a prediction? No. I am a firm believer of leaving difficult situations to experts. I believe in the National Hurricane Center. I am a major fan of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA. I think they do a wonderful job. They're very hardworking and dedicated. Unfortunately, sometimes they have typical government restrictions. And these people are hardworking and dedicated. The regulations that they have to deal with sometimes get in the way. So, in summary, let's see what the National Hurricane Center predicts this year with a report due out soon. Do I have a prediction? No. I am a firm believer in leaving difficult situations, weather forecast situations like hurricanes, to the experts. And I believe in the National Hurricane Center. I'm a major fan of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. I think they do a wonderful job. They're very hardworking and dedicated. Unfortunately, sometimes they have typical government regulations as far as what to say and what to do and how to act, and that any one opinion of one U.S. government forecaster has to be discussed, evaluated, and then come up with a summary that represents the whole organization. It's a judgment that represents the whole National Hurricane Center is usually what comes out. So I have no prediction. I leave it to the experts, and that prediction is coming up real soon. And I think their history of forecasting has been pretty good. Now, I'm looking back to last year, and I don't think the National Hurricane Center predicted how many hurricanes would hit populated areas of the United States. By the numbers, last year there were only 6 hurricanes. One actually didn't even reach the coast or stayed offshore, but close enough to cause damage across the Carolinas on the coast. And so no matter what the prediction is from the National Hurricane Center, a direct hit on a major city area is very difficult to predict. They're not going to predict that. They're going to predict numbers. You're talking about tracking. If you took the average tracks of all the storms through all the years that we've been doing this, most of them would be offshore and it only takes one to make a catastrophe. So most of them are off in the Atlantic or in the Gulf, not affecting major populated areas, but it only takes one to make that major catastrophe, like what occurred with Hurricane Katrina, which, again, I have to stress, the initial effects of Katrina in New Orleans was not bad or super catastrophic. It was that barge that broke the levee that caused the flooding, which led to the catastrophe. So although Katrina was not a direct weather-causing catastrophe, had the storm not occurred, the Katrina disaster would not have happened. Consider this, though. If one of those levees did break on a sunny day in New Orleans, how much flooding would have occurred? Oh, no. So I leave you with that. Depending upon the National Hurricane Center forecast for the upcoming season and what happened along the eastern seaboard early in the mid-late May 2020, this is my hurricane discussion, and I'll be talking about the upcoming summer season and the National Weather Service predictions for the summer season and some New York City facts as well, and what effect a summertime with COVID-19 in the back of our minds will mean in the summertime outdoor activities in mind. So we'll be talking about that soon. Hopefully that's something to consider, as well as the weather effects on us. In other words, will hot weather kill COVID-19 germ? These topics and a few more will be discussed in our next podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed or were informed by the weather and hurricane information in the podcast, and I will talk to you next time. I'm certified consulting meteorologist Steve Pelletieri, and I am the Weatherman. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.